Welcome to the show with your hosts Alain Braux and Mark Moxom. In this program we interview Dr. Wayne Roberts, who's widely respected as an expert on food security, sustainable living and environmental planning. His books have influenced thousands to find better ways of living in an economically viable and healthy society.
Good morning, Wayne, and welcome to the Low Carb Paleo show.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
Good morning, Mark. How's everyone?
One is fine, thank you.
What about two?
Oh, I'm always okay. I trust you two are suitably wonderful as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Wayne, you and I met on LinkedIn. We have similar interests when it comes to sustainable ways of growing foods. But what you advocate is a little different than most other people that I know. Your focus is on growing food in cities. But before we get that, can you tell us about your background?
Sure. Probably the most important thing about me, I think, is that at the age of 55, I became the manager of the Toronto Food Policy Council, which was a very innovative body. At the time I was the head of it, or I started, there were 3 food policy councils in the world, 2 of them relatively small towns in the United States, and Toronto, which was a pretty substantial city, the 4th biggest city in North America. And now there are over 200 of them, and it has spread to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and to Bristol in the United Kingdom, and apparently Paris is about to adopt one, and it's in a number of other cities, over 200 areas altogether. So I believe it's one of the fastest growing trends in urban politics. So naturally in that job, I was supposed to advise the city on how do you develop good food policy. I inevitably had to deal with the issue that 50% of the world's population is urban, and if we want to try to reduce the amount of travel that food undergoes, then we have to start growing some of the food where the people are at. And I suppose secondly, I developed the idea that growing food in the city is not just about getting something to eat, it's also about growing community, growing something that just sucks down carbon from the atmosphere, that pumps out fresh oxygen, that has all sorts of environmental benefits. And so when you put them all together, it's a food security package. It's also a bit of an environmental security package. And if you grow on top of a roof, 1/6 of the size of the space of every city is flat roofs. When you grow on top of the roof, you can really totally transform the microclimate of your city by cooling it. Because instead of cement sucking up and storing heat, you've got plants which are cooling it off. So my reasons are not just for fresh food that you can eat, but also the social benefits of growing food together and the environmental benefits. So that, in a nutshell, is how I got here.
Fantastic. It's very interesting. I don't know how much time we're going to need to develop all of this, but let's start with the beginning. So far you have written 12 books on this subject, and your 2 of the most recent are Food for City Building and the No-Nonsense Guide to World Food. Can you tell us about your philosophy behind them?
Yeah, sure. The one is called Food for City Building, is based on this thing which in my last year at the Food Policy Council, I finally figured out this very simple truth, I think, which was until that time, I've been going around bugging everybody in the city, in the economic development department, why don't you do something about food? In the garbage department, why don't you do something to help out food? And they would basically look at me and say, well, why don't you do my job? So, why am I supposed to do your job? And then finally, in my last year there, I figured out that food is a lever. It may not be part of the business of other people in government, but it can help them achieve their goal. So let me give you a simple example. About one trip in five, one car trip in five that people take in Toronto and in Austin is to buy food. Sometimes it's just to buy milk or sugar that you ran out of, and sometimes it's to do a shopping trip. But and about one truck in three is a food truck. So Toronto, it happens, has the worst traffic jams in the world. So just imagine what it would be if you took one trip out of five out of commission. You'd open up the streets, and you'd create better neighborhoods because people are walking up to a Main Street store. So without having any interest in food whatsoever, a smart city planner is going to say, I'm going to use local food that is right close to your neighborhood as the vehicle for managing traffic in my city.
This is a very interesting concept, but coming from Europe, it's not a new concept. I mean, in Europe, especially in big cities, each neighborhood have their own bakery, their own
Yes.
grocery store, their own meat market, and so on and so forth. So you're basically using old world concept and bringing them to the new world, right?
That's exactly it. So you didn't have the liberty to position your food stores far away from people live because European cities developed before the age of the automobile.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that there's a guy in Toronto who has a nice website. It's called Small Fridges, Big Communities. And it came from having lived for a year in France. And he's sharing a place with 5 other people. And they've got one of these little French fridges, you know. It comes up to a table height, right? And he said, how are we ever going to do it? Well, then it turns out when they wanted to go shopping, they went shopping in the stores just beneath their apartment.
Yep.
And by the end of the year, he knew everybody. They were all friends, and all the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker were all his good buds. And so that's why he developed this concept. Have a small fridge, you get a big community. So we have to do it deliberately and consciously in North America because the great majority of North American geography has been built around the car. In Europe, where you have a totally different civilization, that's why you hardly have any supermarkets in downtown London. I just came back from 2 months in England. You'd never know there are supermarkets until you head way out into the outskirts, because they built the cities tight and dense so you could walk everywhere. So it's not that Europeans are superior to Americans, it's just that they got developed before the age of the automobile.
Yeah.
So I could do the same for garbage. If you want to talk about garbage, half of what we call garbage is food. 40% is food we bought last week and haven't eaten. And the rest of it is food packaging that could be compostable or could be reused. So my argument is that even if you don't give a dime about food or healthy food, cities have to pay attention to food because that's how they can cut the amount of money they spend on garbage and all the environmental destruction. You know that after China and the US, they're the 2 biggest emitters of global warming gases. The third is food waste. So you can't even talk about fixing up the climate unless you talk about food waste.
I thought that cattle was a big, also a very big influence there too. Cattle, cows.
Cows are pretty big.
Yeah.
That's only if you believe.
Well, they have bad manners, They just have not learned how to control gassy stuff.
That sounds like vegetarian propaganda to me.
Well, of course, when cows evolved that way, there was lots of grass that was sucking up carbon that they belched out or pooped out. So, most of the creatures in the world have evolved before humans. We've only been around a couple 100,000 years.
Right.
And so they evolved with a balance in their own ecosystem. And usually those animals were surrounded by forests and by tall grasses, which were just, grasses suck up as much carbon as trees because their roots are so deep.
But what people also don't realize is that most of these commercial operations, where they grow meat for people, literally animals, they are fed genetically engineered corn and grains that is not the natural food of a cow. So it makes them sick, and it creates even more gas. Because
That's right.
typically
I mean, cows have to go on a paleo diet.
right.
They have to get off empty grains and get back to chlorophyll in the grass, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and
they
stop
need a paleo diet more than we do.
and stop being fed, recycled animal meal,
That
right?
absolutely, yeah.
So going back to your business, how can we grow food sustainably in cities?
There's a number of ways, and I would say the biggest problem in the mindset of certainly North Americans is when you ask that question, you mean, what's the one thing we could do? When I finish a talk, they say, tell me one thing I can do. Well, there isn't one thing you can do. There's many things you can do, and I'm offering you a dessert tray that you could pick some of them. So if you live in a house with a backyard or a front yard, you can grow food there. That's a pretty simple thing. And if you live in an apartment, you've got a balcony and you've got windowsills. And if you're near a school, you've got a school which is empty during the summer, which is prime growing season. So there's no reason why we're not using that resource for growing food, and you can rebuild the neighborhood around the school, which is a pretty natural thing to do anyway, right? And as I say, 1/6 of the space of most cities is flat roofs, so and it actually saves the city money to have a green roof. And the reason for that is that when it rains, the rain doesn't all go down the sewage system and cause a flash flood in the sewage system. So the reason why a city should do that is just to save money, but on top of that, you can grow food there for free.
I have a question for you about flat roofs. If you go all over Europe, you never see flat roofs. Why is in America? Why is it in America that seemingly most of the roofs are flat? What's the reason? I mean, it doesn't make sense because it's absorbing all the sun's heat, and then they have to use even more electricity for air conditioning and everything. There's no reflecting anything going on.
Well, I think the reason why Europeans and areas that were settled early in North America had roofs that went like this is that when it rained, or in Canada when it snowed, you wanted it to come off, and you didn't want it to pile up on top of your roof because snow weighs a lot. So does water. Yeah. And so you don't want that weighing down. And also because they didn't have building materials that could be impervious to water and snow. And actually the biggest trick of green roofs to this day is how do you build a roof where you won't get dirty water, with a garden, where you won't get dirty water leaking in. So it's very hard. Nature does not like anything that's impervious, and they do their best to prove you wrong, right? And so that's the real challenge from a construction point of view, ironically. But they just didn't have it. And I think the roofs are old, and the building is very valuable and very beautiful as an old building, so we're not going to destroy it. But when you think of all the institutional buildings in North America, like universities and schools, are all flat, and all the box stores they're called box stores because they're flat. And the only reason why that's flat is that it's the most efficient way to put wiring and everything. It's not for, they never considered being environmentally efficient. That wasn't in their brain to ask that question. So the blessing we have is that we have a lot of flat roofs to grow on. And a flat roof pays for itself, ironically, without even talking about food. It pays first because, as you know, solar radiation, it really ages. It ages our skin, and it ages the skin of the building. And so you can add 20 years to the life of the building by having dirt on it. And then on top of that, you're keeping the rain up there instead of coming down into the sewer. And then the next day, after a rain, it's hot, and the rain evaporates, and it cools the city around it.
Yeah.
So it's like having nature's resilient, breathing, living system as part of your city. And then on top of it, I would say food is the icing on the cake. It's already paid for itself. Now let's get all those seniors in the seniors building up there. We'll build sort of container gardens that are waist high, so you don't have to bend over, which they find very difficult, and you can have your own fresh food and meet your neighbors while you're growing it. That's the package.
Yes, that's a great idea. Plus, you could also use those flat roofs to recuperate water. I mean, to
totally
get all this
you
water
can even
from
get gray water from your own taps, and instead of piping them down into the sewage system, pipe them up and use the gray water as a part of your irrigation system.
Yeah.
So, I'd say there's many areas in the world now they have water shortages, and there's no reason why you only use water once. Like fundamentally, in Germany, they capture all the water from rain on the roof and they put it into their dishwasher because it's already soft, so it doesn't need as much soap. Like, why is Germany the number 2 exporter in the world? Because they're smart, right?
Right.
So there's all sorts of efficiencies that happen when you start to think about it.
So from 2000 to 2010, you were the manager of the Toronto Food Policy Council. What can you give us some examples of what you've accomplished during your tenure?
Well, the biggest problem I have in listing our accomplishments is that the whole world has gone, I would say certainly the whole world in the global north has gone backwards over the last 20 years. There's more poverty, there's more inequality, there's more obesity, there's more of everything. So I can't say to you, as a result of my being there in Toronto, I made things better because the tide is just moving so strongly the other way. So I need to start off modestly by saying I was not able to hold back the tide. But we did a lot of very exciting things. We have community gardens across the city, especially in low-income areas. And wherever that is so, where you have one in a low-income area, there's a low rate of crime and a low rate of gang activity. We used community gardens to defeat gangs. So even if we haven't made a dent in the food insecurity of people on low income or their health, we've been able to keep a lot of them alive because they don't have a gang war going on in their territory. And the reason for that is that you're giving young people love the discipline of farming and agriculture, and they understand it and yearn for it. And so it's a really good way to talk about life with them. It provides quality time. It's not so much, again, I don't care what we're growing, you still get quality time when you're in the garden, right? And secondly, it gives them all sorts of employment skills, like how to take orders, how to challenge authority, and not just, so you learn all sorts of critical life skills. And thirdly, because a community develops, and the reason why gangs develop is that they fall into the vacuum in the absence of community. So Toronto is probably the safest big city in North America. And, I live in an area, I go out for a walk at 2 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't even cross my mind to think that it would be dangerous. And I'm not taking all the credit for that, but community gardens and other ways of community interaction are a big part of that success story.
So it's, if I'm getting you right, it's not just about growing food, it's about growing communities and providing, it's like the old saying, it takes a village to raise a kid, right? It's the same concept here.
Yes.
It takes a community to absorb these kids that
Absolutely.
don't have the right family environment.
Yeah, so we've isolated food into this one category unto itself. There's going to be a food solution, but the way societies traditionally did it, and the French would be a perfect example, is that it's immersed in your whole life. The economy is a big chunk of the economy is about food. A big part of your physical activity is about food. Like, it's not this little wee segment of life that we've isolated off by itself. So
and food is part of all important community events in in a family, whether it's a birth, a birthday, a wedding, even
Everything.
someone dies, food is part of the celebration and getting together and building these bonds or these connections.
Exactly. So I would say, like, if we want to talk paleo, like what I like about paleo is let us be somewhere close to the way that humans evolved. And humans evolved where community and food were part of the same system. And when I caught some meat and brought it back, I didn't have a refrigerator. So we had what you would call social refrigeration. I invited everybody in the tribe to come and have dinner with me, right? And we told stories around the fireplace. And when a baby is born, they were breastfed, and that's how the mother bonded with the baby and the baby bonded with the mother. It's never been a thing in and of itself. It's always been tied to strengthening community ties. So my concern about paleo is it's too much on the nutrition physiological side, and the paleo we need to recover is the paleo of community.
Yeah.
Right. There's actually a group of paleo people that are starting to emphasize the lifestyle versus just food only.
Yeah.
And the exercise only. They're talking. They're more global. You know, it's not just about food. It's not just about exercise. It's about
It's a more holistic
reduction,
experience, isn't it?
more holistic. Moving, meditating. Water, sleeping. Stress reduction and all of that. So yes.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's very cool.
Yeah. So there's and I've seen that the Paleo Effects 2015 is there's some of the leaders in the Paleo movement are moving away from being hardcore, and they are a little more flexible as far as the quote unquote rules. And they say you need to be flexible. If you need to eat a little bit of beans, even though it's not allowed because your body needs that, then fine, do it. So in the bigger scheme of thing, they're trying to emphasize the fact that paleo should be a way of life, not just a diet.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. So that's a big lesson of my experience, I believe, is you got to have what we call a big tent, and we got to get over this, what Freud called it, the narcissism of small differences. And we're all in a large group trying to move back towards a more natural way of eating and being, right? So,
yeah.
And you asked me about my two books. My other one is called The No-Nonsense Guide to World Food. And I suppose the simplest message of that is don't use the phrase which we use all the time, food problem. There is no such thing as a food problem. There's a human problem in mishandling food.
Yeah.
But we don't have any food problems. We produce more than enough food to feed everyone in the world, a healthy diet. And our bodies evolved to be healthy if we ate it. So any problems we have are not food problems, they're system problems.
Yeah.
So don't use a phrase that puts the blame on the food instead of where it belongs. It's sort of like a woman who very much influenced me around waste was Abby Rockefeller, who said, waste is a verb, not a noun. And you see in the phrase food waste, people talk about food waste. No, it's humans are wasting. It's not the food that's wasting, right?
Yeah.
So, because even if the food's no good to eat because it's too old, there's still many positive uses. It can be compost, it can be biofuel, it can be livestock feed. There's all sorts of things. So it's only created by us. It is not in the food. So therefore, I try to forbid anyone from saying food problem.
What boggled my mind is when you say that almost up to 50% of our food is wasted. How does that happen when we have a difficult economy where a lot of the average people have to count pennies? I mean, how do you explain that much waste?
Well, the waste occurs at every stage of the process. And unfortunately, the emphasis has been only on me, the consumer. I go shopping last Thursday and I bought too much. And I was too lazy to cook this stuff up and whatever, and so I got 40% left over, which I'm going to throw out. That's a chunk. But I would argue that even as much has been lost before it got within 10 miles of the consumer.
Right.
One of it was, until very recently, if the food was not cosmetically perfect, as you know, you won't go into the supermarket and not see a supermarket carrot, a supermodel, right? It's all, bright tomatoes. They got no pimples, no blemishes. They're like all supermodel foods. And if they're not that, they got to be tossed out.
And they've got a drug problem as well.
Pardon me?
And their food's got a drug problem as well.
Yeah. So the farmers have to self-censor and get rid of all that food. And there's one example right there. The other is, food is meant to go bad. That's how it evolved. It's perishable. And so there's lots of other stuff. The food is grown way too far from where people are. And I'm very happy to know that you teach chefing, and a key skill of the chef is, you go to the farmer's market on Monday morning and then you cook on Monday night what you got at the farmer's market on Monday morning, right?
Yeah.
And that's a bare amount of waste. And there's a big trend which I'm trying to support among chefs is not to have a menu that's written, but to have the chalkboard. Yeah. Because then you buy, as a chef, enough for that night. And if you got a little bit left over, you serve it the next day. But
that's the way it's always.
Full menu.
That's the way it's always been in France. I as a chef, most of the establishment I work for, the chef would go to the market in the morning, what was available and fresh, he would buy and he would build his menu on it. My mom or my grandmother, they would go to the market every day and they cooked only what was available that day.
That's right.
It's in food season.
It's almost impossible to waste that way, right?
Yeah.
Right. And the old days, they didn't have, refrigerators and everything. So they had to follow the season. They had to buy food that was at the peak of nourishment and quality, freshness. Yeah.
If you're a restaurant with a long menu, you have no way of knowing, whether the pork is going to last you, after 30 days, you got to throw it out if it hasn't been eaten. So there's huge amounts of food are dumped. So we need to know that waste is built into the system. It's not just a consumer problem. And then, Alain, you asked the key question, how can we have huge amounts of waste and have hunger at the same time, side by side? That's the paradox of the modern food system. And there's a guy who lives in Austin, Texas, Raj Patel, who's written a book on this called Stuffed and Starved, right?
Yeah, well, actually we're trying to get him on the show.
You get him.
We're going to need your help with that.
Charming and smart guy, and he wrote the foreword to my book. So we have a mutual admiration society. But
so let me ask you, since you're talking about this the farmers have to, pick and choose only the best because the soils reject all the ugly-looking food. What about selling this not quite acceptable food to the public at the discount directly?
Well, that's what's happening. In a big supermarket in France pioneered it, and it totally took off. And just this morning, a senior cabinet minister in France has said all of Europe should adopt France's law. So this could spread like wildfire. And the people who actually own the French supermarket are the Weston family, which own all the supermarkets in Canada, or half of the supermarkets in Canada. So they're now pioneering it here. But there's hundreds of ways to do it. When I was in Brazil, I actually saw a much better way than putting it through supermarkets, which was they're operating in a big food terminal on the outside of a city, and somebody dropped a pumpkin, and before I could even see it roll away, somebody picked it up and they put it on a line and they made soup with it because they had the food bank was right in the food terminal.
All right.
And interesting thing they do in Brazil is they don't have food banks for people as individuals, but if you belong to the seniors club in your neighborhood, or the parent teachers association in your neighborhood, when you go there for the meeting, they have dinner. Well, the dinner is what they just made from the food terminal.
Yeah.
So because they don't want people eating in isolation. That is another thing. People did not evolve to sit in front of their desk or while they're driving their car and eat.
No.
You eat as a group. And that's part of how you have a good digestive preparation, is that you're relaxed and enjoying it. And the main problem of people on low income is they're lonely.
Yeah.
And so somebody's now going to come to the Parent Teacher Association so they can get a free dinner, but they're going to become part of a community, and they're going to give to the community, and the value of that is going to be way more than $2 for a pumpkin in a soup, right?
Yeah.
So
Right. Or you also have the issue of the food desert, which is some neighborhoods don't have access to fresh food. They have to travel miles and miles. Most of them can't afford a car, so they just keep shopping at the local little stores that sells only packaged food, and then never access to fresh food. So your solution, having gardens in the city, even in the inner city, will provide fresh food to the neighborhoods.
that's right. And there's a great guy, Malik Yakini, who is trying to do that in Detroit. You know, in the city of Detroit, there's no supermarket in the whole city.
Yeah.
It's just staggering. But, you know, at a certain point, you have to admit that the problem is stupidity.
Yeah.
Like, you know, even in the United States, which has got the least public health care system in the world, seniors get Medicaid and people on social assistance get Medicaid. So it is so much cheaper to provide a subsidized, you know, co-op food store in a low-income area than it is to pay for the results of it, of not having a food store.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's what I think my concept of food as a lever is also partially about. You're subsidizing the wrong end of a problem.
Yeah. It's all about fix. I mean, it's a typical example of Western way of thinking about things, is that you fix the symptom, but you don't fix the source. So the source would be provide fresh, healthy food up front so people stay healthy, so they don't have to spend so much money on being sick and have to tap the social system for healing, right? So, and it's exactly what I've been advocating for years, is that start with the beginning. Eat healthy food and you'll stay healthy, and you don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to doctors, hospital, and the system.
This is true. One of the things that the French government's done recently is that they've now made it illegal for supermarkets to dump food. It has to be given to groups who will then disperse it amongst the needy people.
There's so many solutions along this vein. So the argument I used to make at the City of Toronto, which, to be honest, everybody supported, I wasn't considered weird, but is that when you have a school meal program, you only have to stop one kid in that school from getting diabetes to pay for the whole program. Yeah. Because the lifetime cost of a child onset diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is $1.5 million over the lifetime. Because you know the trajectory of the life is very simple. They're prone to eye disease, to blindness, to heart disease, and to amputation.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, you don't want to do a reform that costs $2 a day to prevent this. It's beyond stupidity. And the other thing is that every kid you save from a low, a very low level of the reform school system and the reform detention centers is $200,000 a year. So it's a lifetime of jail is like in the millions. So the pay for this program, it's so opposite to rocket science.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And
well, let's not forget.
We need to emphasize the economics on this are very, very strong.
Yeah.
Well, let's not forget the greed factor too. I mean, those school programs, the dairy company are behind it, and they want those kids to get used to drink milk and eat chocolate milk that's loaded with sugar, and it will eventually turn to diabetes. So you know, it shouldn't be that difficult to switch from milk to just water, even if it's bottled water. Right?
It's a very radical idea, Alan.
but you're also facing a huge, powerful a group that will fight tooth and nail to keep kids drinking milk, right?
Yeah, but there's a very ancient wisdom, which is the best things in life are free, right? And that's where water fits in.
Yeah.
So, which is another cornerstone of a true paleo diet, right?
Yeah.
I have a coffee cup here, but I'm actually sipping water.
So, but I mean, you know, I mean, it wouldn't be, but then of course we'll be switching from one group to another. Now the water group, the water business is also extremely big and also extremely profitable, even probably more so than the dairy business.
Well, I should say almost by definition that the water system needs to be based on public water without containers. Otherwise, produce more toxins in the container than you can ever
and more garbage in the oceans and so on and so forth. So it should be only tap filtered water and served to the kids and not bottled plastic bottles and all that crap. So one thing I read about you is you talk a lot about food security. Can you explain food security to us?
Yeah, well, I think most people in the United States certainly know the concept of national security. And foods, and I think also many people in the United States and elsewhere in the world know of the term social security. And that's based on the idea that it's not one person in a gated community that has national security, right? You only have national security if the whole nation is secure.
Yeah.
And it's the same with social security, that actually it's not I'm protected, and so the fact that these guys are poor and having a problem, it's none of my concern. That's not a very mature understanding of social security, because if they turn to crime, you could be the one that gets hit, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of calling it food security in the 1970s, which actually came from an incredibly conservative person, Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State for Nixon, was we got to think of this just like national security, because his concern was the United States was losing its food security because the people who owned oil in the Middle East could hijack the country, and you had a food system that couldn't function without fossil fuels. So the idea of food security is that the fundamental premise of it is you got to be secure as a whole society. And so what's needed for food security is different than what's needed for you personally to get food. What is it necessary? Well, the average city in North America has 3 days of food on supply, right? 3 days. And you can check with that's commonly stated, but the Toronto Public Health Department had the right to summon all the supermarkets in because they were concerned about an outbreak of disease. And so they ordered them to give them the information, how much supply do you have? And they said 3 days. So, as the saying goes, every city is 9 meals from anarchy. Like, what are you going to do after your 9th meal? It's gone. So, that nobody in their right mind can say that that's a secure city in the event of drought or a trucker strike or California not being able to produce. Or, you can't say that our city is secure with 3 days food supply. So you got to up it from 3 days by a little bit, right? So that's one element of food security. And if a huge chunk of your population doesn't have adequate income, well, 20% of American children, I just read this morning, live in poverty. Well, you know, by definition, they're not getting the food that they need to live properly. mentally or physically. So, therefore, income is part of a food security system. And if you've limited the number of seeds that grow and there's a disease that can kill that just like that and destroy your wheat crop, you're also not secure. So you need diversity. So most people, I would say primarily in North America, when they ask about is their food system secure, they mean, can I always get food?
Yeah.
That's not what food security is. It's can the community always get food, and I'm a member of it, can I get it? So when you ask about food security, you ask much bigger questions. And I think these are questions that have generally not been asked in North America. That's why there's very little public policy about food security. There's virtually none. And weird as you might think it, the United States has got an energy policy, they got a gun policy, they got a this policy, and they got a that policy, they got hundreds of policies. One thing they don't have is a food policy. And
well,
I think
that's what I wanted to insert, and I know it's going to be, some people are going to get upset at me for saying so, but why are we not spending more money on food security and less money on national security? Why are we fighting, we're spending billions and trillions of dollars in fighting wars all over the world when we have people starving in our country?
Yes, good question.
That's because the powers that be make money out of wars and so on, but they don't make money out of starving people, or by stopping people starving.
Yeah. Well, it's simple in the way that you describe it, and it's complicated at the same time. It's a false notion of security, really. So, and I think one of the interesting things is how the bee issue has taken off. It's really captured people's imagination in a way that few issues have. There's hundreds of blog sites and Twitter sites devoted to it, and I know if I tweet out an item about bees, it gets lots and lots of retweets. And the reason why is they understand, the fact that I get food isn't just about the relationship I have with my supermarket, it's the relationship that I have with bees, with meadows and forests and the places where pollinators exist. Because if we don't have pollinators, you've knocked off half your food supply. So I think bees are the issue that have made food security start to come alive in most people's mind. They now see this food web is very complicated, and we got to do a lot of things to sustain it.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that the poison that we spray on our food, on our growing food, whether it's genetically engineered or not, are killing those pollinators that we need the most.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I mean, they're called pesticides for a good reason. The side, like homicide and genocide, is murder, right? So it happens that other creatures get killed at lower levels than we do, lower levels of exposure. But, you could also say the bees are a bit of a canary in the mine, that they're alerting us, I can't take this level of pesticide, so it's probably not, I can't live 1 year with it. So you can be 20 times stronger than I am in terms of the pesticide, but it's going to get you in 20 years, right? So it's a bit of a good alert.
But it's also the issue that without pollinators, there's no such thing as agriculture.
That's correct. Well, one reason why agriculture was a little less developed in North America than in Europe at the time the Europeans discovered it. It was very well developed in Mexico and in South America, and the beginnings of it here, is that there were no native bumblebees or any of the ones that do the most rich pollination. So pollinators are fundamental to anything that flowers, which is a heck of a lot of things. So we have to take care of them. And again, it's not the relationship between me and the supermarket and the farmer. It's the relationship between me and nature that we have.
Nature, yes.
Yeah. So we left nature out of the equation. I believe around 1945 something happened to the global North personality, and they forgot that there's this relationship we gotta maintain.
It doesn't seem to make sense that we are destroying the same thing that is supposed to keep us alive, nature.
That's correct. But I think when you're in trouble and a community comes through for you, which often happens to people if they lose a loved one or something like that, your kid's lost, the whole community mobilizes to help find them and all that. Well, those are the true safety systems that we have. But they get strained and weakened if you don't keep them going. And the reason why traditional societies always had lots of parties and lots of times that people came together is you're nourishing those ties in the event of an emergency where they'll become your life-saving system. So we tend to take our safety a bit too much for granted and not realize we got a broader security net, human and natural, that we need to keep our relationships up.
Yeah, keep alive. I've always told my son, I said, you better make sure you're friends with your neighbors, because if a disaster happens, don't count on the government to come and save your ass. Your neighbors will be there to help you, but right, because that's typically what happens. If there's like we have had some big floods about a month ago, and you couldn't count on the government to help, but the people got together and went in and helped and started clean up and started helping rebuild and all that. You don't see the government doing any of that stuff, typically.
Well, the economists give what you're talking about, they give the term social capital.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not the same as bank capital, but it's what society can do that's of value that you could even monetize what that value is. And the thing about food is it is the biggest builder of social capital. Like, you can have solar photovoltaics, which is a good thing, but it's not building any social capital in your community. You're not saying, come on over to my house and we'll stand around the solar PVs and make community, but you can invite them over for a barbecue, right? So food is a great contributor to that. And one of the things that we did a lot in Toronto was that we used food as a social capital promoter. And I gave it that name, social capital, because the language of North America is the language of money. So if you use the language of money, they understand it. So there's this trend called a progressive party, and if you look on Google, you'll see there's millions and millions of them. But a progressive party is, you come on over to my house, we'll have some light drinks, and then we're going to move over to Mark's house, and we're going to have a little appetizer, and then we're going to go to Alain's house and have the first course. And then we're having a drink at each point, and then you only have to walk home, you don't have to drive home. You get progressively more drunk. I think that's why it's called progressive. You move from one house to the next. Well, we had a progressive party like that in our neighborhood about 10 years ago, and ever since then, all these other things have developed out of it. There's systems to look after people when they get elderly and ill. There's a book club of women who are reading novels. There's all sorts of things have just sprung out of this thing that twice a year we have a progressive dinner. And everyone can say hello to everyone on the street. It's just how much simpler can you get as an organizing tool to make societies function better? So if somebody has a problem, I think the beginning of thinking on this was in Chicago in 1993. They had a heat wave, and a number of seniors died in the heat wave. And Mayor Daley was smart enough to figure out among the seniors who died, the ones who died were people who didn't have anyone knocking on their door to see if they were okay. And so many programs in Chicago come out of that genius to see that connection. And they built living streets, They have a very advanced pedestrian policy. They got very active food movement. They have a thing now, I think, where there's something like 200 chefs are cooking at a farmer's market to popularize the idea of farmer's market as a place to go shopping. So they really paid attention to that connection.
So going back on the paleo subject, how does your work connect back to the paleo world?
I think I'm not necessarily paleo, although I'm very sympathetic to their key insights. And I think their key insights is we have to pay attention to how we evolved. So we've been around for in our present form approximately 200,000 years. A maximum of them has been agricultural for 10,000 years for a very small portion of the world's population. And so the way our bodies evolved and the way societies evolved until that time, we got to listen up and see how people adapted their relationship. And the fact is that humans did not live longer than the original cave people until 1900. Okay, the result of moving to an agricultural and urban society from 10,000 years ago until 1900 was you died younger than they had died before. So they had a few things figured out. So that's my idea. Let's go to the cornerstones of their life. They didn't invent pop back then. They drank water. That's why our body doesn't tell us you're getting full, because there's no calories in water. There's no reason for humans to feel full and stop eating, right? And they evolved on a diet of a good amount of raw material and almost all complex carbohydrates. Virtually no simple carbohydrates. And a huge variety of foods. Like when they look at the stomachs, or the archaeological results of the DNA testing, and they look at the stomachs either of people who live a quote-unquote primitive life today or from before, they see like they had 140 things going through them. Well, the average North American has 10 things going through them. One of them is corn. Like there's virtually no diversity in your gut. And so I think what we have to learn from paleo is not the answer, but the question. How did humans evolve? What kind of food was key to the way we evolved? And what kind of food was key to the way cows and pigs evolved? And let's return to that until proven otherwise. So, they have a regulatory method in almost every country in the global north called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. Yeah. They've never put it to any test. Well, generally recognized as safe is what we ate for 190,000 years, right? So let's, until proven otherwise, let's follow that. Fair amount of exercise to collect all your greens, and fair amount of standing up, very little sitting in front of a computer, very little drinking of pop. And so I think we owe the paleo movement that insight, like of natural food, which of course we can build on and differ on how to apply it. But that I'm very happy to acknowledge my debt to them in that area.
Coming back onto food security again, does part of that food security revolve around having food that is fit to eat?
Yes. So, food security is almost every year in the last 10 years, there's a new phrase added onto what food security means. It used to mean that you have enough food to live, and now it's sort of that you have enough food that is nutritious for a long and active life, that is culturally appropriate, and all sorts of other things like that. As we get a broader sense that nutrition is not just physical, but so for example, among the more advanced people in the nutrition profession now use the term culturally appropriate, meaning if you're from China and you want to say that you have a food secure community, there should be some place to get what you considered as your favorite foods. Right. Not necessarily every day, but that they would be readily available. And most like there's lots of Chinese greens can grow up here in Canada, and so I'm sure they can in Austin as well. So take a little bit of effort. Don't just grow the crops that Anglo-Saxons grew.
Yeah.
And I always correct anybody in Canada, say, oh, you mean you want us to grow ethnic food? I say, no, ethnic food is Welsh, Scottish, French and German. I want you to grow world foods, right? And so that's one part of it. And part of it is that we respect other people's traditions, that kosher food should be available at universities, halal food. Like we usually make, I think certainly in Canada, it's required that universities offer a place for Muslims to pray during the day, and they should also provide them a means to eat food the way they consider it appropriate for their mental health, right? And likewise, I would say I consider a vegetarian, usually that's an ethical belief rather than a nutrition belief, and that we should respect that. And then the other one is that's been added to it is dignity. So by that they mean when you go to a food bank and you got to beg for food, nobody can tell you that there's dignity in that. I don't care what the quality of the food is. And that's why in Brazil, you don't get the food because you're poor. You get the food because you're in the Parent-Teacher Association meeting and because you're a member of the community, not because you're a marginalized person who's a loser, right?
Yeah.
So there's no
stigma. No.
Yeah. And so those are all parts of mental health. And I would say too much in North America, we have a physical understanding of food. We don't have enough of a emotional, social, and spiritual sense of it.
No, that's very true. I'd like to come back to you on that school program that you were talking about, where you said that stopping one child getting diabetes is enough to pay for the whole program. Would you like to sort of expand on that?
I'll just give you a back of the envelope estimate of the cost of a nutritious meal for a kid is $2, right? So I used the wrong word there. I just said the cost of a nutritious meal is $2. The investment of a meal is $2.
That's a better way of putting it,
okay? So I don't even know where to begin and end, how I get the return on that investment. One way to do it is to say, we know there is an awful rate of childhood obesity, and every time I go out and see a gang of kids, like I live right near the beach on Lake Ontario, and there's kids running around, playing tag, spraying each other with water and chasing each other. It's impossible for kids to be overweight. They are just moving all the time. I mean, you have to categorize it as a sin that we have overweight children. Yeah. And but once you're overweight as a child, you'll be fighting that for the rest of your life because your body clock is right off. It's just a terrible thing for us to load on the shoulders of young people. And so we want to, that the United States spends more on diet programs than the gross national product of Ireland. It's just staggering. So instead of using that money, let's use that for the school meal program. Yeah. Instead of, somebody who is going to have diabetes is facing a lifetime of disease. Somebody who goes off their beaten track because they're not paying attention at school. Other kids start making fun of them. The teacher assumes they're stupid, all for lack of having any food to feed their brain. Yeah. The trajectory of what happens when you don't eat, there's nobody who wants to pay that bill. No. And so the first thing is you look at school meal programs not as a cost, but as an investment, in the same way that a road is or any other infrastructure. And that really a school meal program is an infrastructure program. Well, who says, well, we should have a road program, but we're not going to worry if there's potholes all the way along the road? I say that's stupid because then my car will have so much damage I'll be paying more for car repairs than it would cost to pave the road. So treat it like an infrastructure investment. And treat your human body like you treat the body of your car, right? Yeah. Preventive maintenance. So that's to my mind, once you think of it that way, you unlock the possibilities. And one of the possibilities, of course, is you support small local farmers who supply your school meal program, also give you, as a condition of the contract, a free tour for kids to see the farm during school hours.
Mm-hmm.
And they also are the people who say, we not only have 3 days food supply in the supermarket, but we got local farmers who are growing food. So it's just a multiple generator of benefits. And so the problem with the cheap food system, which is what we have in the global north, is that you always ask the question, what does it cost? And you never ask the question, what is it worth? Or what is it investment in?
Yeah.
So we've got to flip the question. Oddly enough, the food movement is the last social movement to be developed by humans. We've been eating our entire lives as a species. And we've had union movements, feminist movements, all sorts of movements for the mass suffrage, for the French Revolution, like quadrillions of movements, but we've only had a food movement in the last 10 years. Like before, we had people who were into nutrition or farmers organization, but not about food.
Yeah.
So it's a very young movement, and very quickly it's figured out areas of commonality, that it's not just about food, it's about social stuff, it's about valuing health, and it's about being creators of your health rather than consumers. So it's come together very rapidly.
Yeah.
That's what I find very exciting about it.
It is, and I think that what you've been talking about is not just a sort of a holistic, it's a macro holistic approach.
Correct.
And I think that's thoroughly fascinating and has immense possibilities just for common good and individual well health.
Out of the city of Austin, Texas came a food chain called Whole Foods, right? So probably some hippy dippy who understood holistic. But really, food and whole, like it was a very clever marketing tool.
Yeah.
And because food and thinking about things as a whole and whole foods, those are concepts that much predate the chain, right?
In our pre-interview discussion, you mentioned that the young people are actually picking up the baton, and they're the one most concerned about the food future and the food safety for all of us. Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell us more about this? Because there we are, three old guys talking about foods from our point of view, but what does the young generation feel about food and their future?
Well, it just happened because of my job at the City of Toronto. I had a front row seat on this, which was when I started working there in the year 2000, everybody in and on and around the Food Policy Council was approximately my age. It was like a great power movement. So, we always had to have public meetings so that anybody could come in and observe. And then I designed the meetings so they would be interesting to the public. We usually had a public speaker, and we made them into a bit of networking sessions. And so from 2000 until 2004, we would have, 10 or so people would come in and see our meetings, just sort of a form of transparency, really. And they were all the same age as the people who were on the Food Policy Council. Then all of a sudden I started noticing a couple of people were 25, and then like a whole bunch of people were 25, and then the fire marshal came and kicked us out of the bloody meeting because we had overcrowded, we were packing the room beyond its ability. So I saw right in front of my eyes that in 1 year, young people got onto food. And it's been the same ever since. You could say, if you wanted to be picky about it, you could say it's not just a youth movement, it's a young women's movement, because it is primarily women, but it's fundamentally a youth movement. And I would say we always think about the internet generation grew up on the internet, right? They know, if I talk to any adult, said, well, I'm thinking of getting on Facebook, but I don't know how. I said, well, ask your 12-year-old. Right? Yeah. So they're totally familiar and comfortable with it, and they think in a way that is appropriate, that the internet has taught them to think. And in the same way, when I grew up and we grew up in the 1940s and 50s. We grew up thinking processed food was normal. We knew how to open a can, right? Just like they know how to open a Facebook site. So, and all these things sort of determined our consciousness. And so they've grown up in an instant world, in a synthetic world, in an artificial world, in a virtual reality world. We're just talking together, three of us, as if we're together, but we're oceans and continents apart.
Yeah, yeah.
And usually what happens is when society goes in one extreme direction that way, that is towards the artificial, the synthetic, and the unreal and the virtual, people go the opposite way, which is the real, the immediate, the touchable. And those things are now rare in our society, whereas once we had too many of them and we counterbalanced it by going the other way with the otherworldly things, we're now coming back into being earthy, right? And people want something that's like, to get your hands in the dirt, to get your hands on the carrots is a considered time off. It's not a chore you assign to the underpaid staff, right? And so, and they love the sense of smell and taste and this, you know, so this is a generation, the most deprived of normal sensory experiences, has taken food as its course to that. And likewise of the real relationships. It's not just about the food itself, but the integrity of relationships. Sort of, you think of the non-integrity of relations are people who are, you know, investors and traders and stock houses who are making disgraceful salaries for not adding any value, and yet I'm going to value somebody who cooks food. So if you notice, one of the words that are used in the food movement are whole and authentic. So that's your clue that, well, as to what's driving it. They're not making a secret about it.
No, that's true.
And it's not hard to see if you listen up. So I think that's what it's about. And they have an experience which makes them value it. And others, like baby boomers, don't have an experience that enables them to automatically get it, right?
Yeah. So where do you see it going to from now on?
Well, I think three things are happening at the same time. We could actually do another program on this, but it is that young people are rediscovering the city and food and politics at the same time.
Right.
And so, and that's what's producing what we see in front of us. So the old concept of politics has been revolutionized by the internet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we can all share information. You know, there wasn't, when I grew up, I was the first person I knew to have a BA. Like none of the parents in my neighborhood ever finished public school, elementary school. And so obviously the teacher was a really revered and respected person in the community, even though at that time they only had a high school education to teach elementary school.
Yeah.
But the parents would go like, "Oh my God, we're meeting the teacher." So, and the kids were like, "Oh God, if they say anything bad about me, I'm in trouble." Well, you know, at my daughter's school, the teacher was the least educated person in the room, right? Like, we've just flipped it.
Yeah.
You know, you go to see the doctor, you say, "Well, I've read up more about my disease than you know," right?
Yeah.
It's like and you know, I'll tell you, as a result of government cutbacks and governments being very narrow-minded, there's not an NGO leader, a non-government organizational leader, who doesn't know more than a government staffer. You know, you can go to the USDA, which is a very respected United States Department of Agriculture. It's the second biggest user of tax money in the United States after the military. It's very respected around the world. But I tell you, I'll go through the halls of that building with the leaders of civil society organizations in Austin, and they'll clean the clock with them. They know more. So it's just reversed. The whole tables have been turned in terms of who has knowledge, who knows how to do things. And so that's what I mean by the reinvention of politics.
Yeah.
The city, people are finding it's not a disgraceful place you live if you're so poor you can't afford not to live there, you want to live in the middle of suburbia. No, now everybody wants to live in the downtown, the excitement and the grit and smells and everything of the city. And food, they've all been rediscovered at exactly the same time. So that, in my opinion, is what's going to drive the world forward over the next 30 years. Unfortunately, it has a deadline, which is the global warming. That if they don't fix it fast, we're screwed. We don't have the normal 50 years to go after a solution.
To end on a positive note, you think there's definitely hope. Things are changing for the better.
Well, I can
at the grassroots level, not on the government level, but grassroots is taking the issues on hand. They are changing things without waiting for the government to do it.
That's correct. I say for people coming out of old activist movements, the word I coined in my book is actionism. I got it from a young man named Michael Sacco. He said, "I'm tired of you guys you just want to have demonstrations. I want to be the change I want to see." Like, they get the Gandhi thing. Young people get that totally. And so I believe we are now nurturing the future system. It's a seed in the larger North American society. And when the larger systems, as they collapse, we are moving forward. And actually, I'm just about to write an article on how we are winning the food war. That is the food movement, which has got to be the most underfinanced movement in the history of the world, versus big food, which has got to be one of the best financed, including $20 billion a year in subsidies from the U.S. government. But there's almost a day that not a day goes by. General Mills says, we're going to take the artificial coloring out of our cereals. Somebody else says, we're going to take this out. Chicken fillet is going to stop using antibiotics in chicken. Like, we're hammering them with our little flagging army of unarmed people, right? We're knocking them, these multi-billion-dollar organizations, kicking their ass, so to speak. So
people are starting to realize, and thank God for the internet for that. People are starting to realize that they have the power to change things with the sheer number of people. So, every time you share an article about GMOs, or you share an article about this company using poisonous ingredient in their food, it goes all over the world, and then we as consumers start to put pressure on the company and say, we're not going to buy your crap. And we have the pocketbook power to change things. Yeah, and we should use that.
That's right. And it's happening. I mean, I don't know in Austin, but I mean, Austin is internationally respected as a center of innovation and weirdness, right? And so, but you know what? Nobody's opening up a new, McDonald's franchise. Like, people want something more interesting, and so I believe the millennial generation, all the polls that are taken of them, they're coming out very well. So, and even the seniors, the fact is that at our age, I was very much influenced by this book called Younger Next Year, which I think has been a bestseller in the U.S. They just have one chapter, a little chapter on food. It says, "Stop eating crap." But basically they say, and I believe I have proof of that, if you live an active life, you'll be healthier at 66 than you were at 65, and healthier at 67. Like, I have a leaner stomach, a stronger back, everything about me is stronger. I'm now 70 than when I retired at 66. So, and they said, don't ever use the line like, oh, you better start eating right or exercising or you're going to die young. He said, no, the medical system will keep you alive. Don't worry 1 minute about that. The question is, do you want to die after 10 years in waiting rooms and operations and going from 2 legs to 1 leg? Or do you want to finish doing the marathon and 2 nights later at 94 years old, you go to sleep and you don't wake up? So that's So when the boomers get that, they're going to move on to healthy food for sure.
Yeah, they are indeed.
Well, where can people reach you for speaking engagements and to buy your books and so on?
Well, my book is available on Amazon and selfie.com, which is a real sort of community-oriented electronic thing that's food for city building. And the No Nonsense Guide to World Food is available in bookstores, or they probably have to order it, to be honest, or you can get it electronically on the internet. And I most appreciate it if people follow me on Twitter at W Roberts Food, and we'll maintain some relationship, because there's two ways to use these media. One is as broadcast media, and the other is as relationship media. So I believe the real value of them is, well, I can have a chat with somebody in Austin or in Paris, and I work actually with people in both of those communities thanks to these technologies. And this is sorry to take this aside, it's the huge leap that we're going to be able to make, which is France came up with this thing about supermarkets putting reduced prices on cosmetically challenged food. And they're now going to get all of Europe to do it, right?
Ugly food, yeah.
Yeah, and it's going to spread to North America. And we can move out solutions at a pace that's never been equal. Like the Industrial Revolution started in England in 1760, and it's still moving around the world, 10 years ago, till most of the world was industrialized. The internet has taken over the world in 20 years, right? And food can move in 5 years. We can transform the whole bloody thing.
Yeah,
indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can teach them to cook. How long does it take you to teach them to cook?
This particular class is taking 6 months because we're teaching them different aspects of plant food. So we go from vegan, vegetarian, Ayurvedic, microbiotic, and raw food. And it's all plant-based. So the program itself is 6 months. But to teach anyone, that's an interesting question, because...
A week. You can teach people basic nutrition and how to cook it in a week or less. So
imagine if you, if somebody said, I just want to stop feeding my family crap, and you can say, well, in a week, they did a study of women in France and England as to how long it took them to make a dinner. The French woman making it from ingredients, and the English woman making it from stuff she'd bought to throw into the oven and ready to heat and eat, right? And by the time they finished throwing all the garbage out, etc., they both took 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I can vouch for that.
The French woman had confidence that she knew how to do it, and the English woman lacked that confidence.
Yeah.
So it's a confidence issue. And so what you can do in a week is overcome their low confidence.
Yeah, it's learning basic techniques as well.
Yes. So, in other words, we have the capacity to, and then after your first week, you can watch videos, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, we just got an unprecedented capacity to move this out. And so I would say when the people are ready, we're going to move it out.
I guess the reason why I had a hard time answering that question is because I'm a professional chef, and I started learning with my grandmother, my mother, and then eventually apprenticeship and all. So for me to put myself in the shoes of someone that's never cooked before, it's extremely difficult.
Impossible.
I've always been around food.
And also, you're asking, when farmers sometimes used to get worried about urban agriculture, that it was going to compete with them. I said, don't even spend a second worrying about that. When I've grown a tomato and seen what is involved in getting a tomato, I'll never complain again about the price of a tomato. And the more you cook, the more you appreciate what a chef can do.
Yeah.
Because I just can't get, some of my meals are okay, but they're not at the level of a beginning chef, right? So you respect what they learn, and generally we lack self-respect in terms of our ability to do food, and we lack respect for food. And
people are still amazed when I tell them how simple my food is nowadays. I mean, I don't use any fancy techniques or anything. I mean, I don't work in a restaurant anymore. So my cooking is the techniques are very basics. I have a little toaster oven because I live alone. Even if I live with someone, I still use a toaster oven because that's all I need to cook whatever food I'm preparing. I don't own and don't use a microwave. I hate those things. And whatever other things I do, I can do all on the stovetop. And my cutting board is about 12 inches wide. That's all I need. People imagine that because you're a chef, you prepare these fancy meals every night. You don't. I don't. I mean, ask any chef. And to be truthful, they will tell you when they get home, they don't cook. They don't cook at home. That's their profession. It's not their hobby.
Yeah.
And so I keep my food very healthy, but yet very simple. No fancy meals. No, of course, if I guess in a special occasion, I will get out of my way to prepare something a little more fancy. But typically on a daily basis, my foods are very simple. Now, don't confuse simple with bad or not healthy. No.
Yeah, these are all equations we don't want to make, like quick, fast, and junk is not the same.
No.
And junk is not the same. Exactly, like simple. No. The reason why you can simple it is because you know how to do it in a profound way.
Yeah. You've got experience.
Yeah. So, well, I think that, that's, I mean, we need to, chefs are playing an unbelievable role in the food movement.
Yeah.
And, the one reason why you can be extremely optimistic is that when the best people in the profession are in favor of this, that it's going to win.
Yeah.
And the best chefs are into local and sustainable food and in cooking methods that honor the ingredients, right?
Yeah. Right. When because as you can imagine, I'm very hard to please when I go out to eat at restaurants, right? So the only restaurants I eat at are the restaurants that only use local food, only.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, I worked as a consultant for a restaurant. You know that in the back room it's all loaded with cans and frozen products. So you get to know your chef the same way as you get to know your farmer, and you get, you ask him a lot of questions about the source of his food, and then you trust him that when you have a meal at this restaurant, you're not going to get any poison or any can of frozen crab that is, sold by Cisco or any kind of food distributor. It comes from the market, and I'm willing to pay a little more to eat good quality fresh food than going to just a regular restaurant where I'm going to be sick the next couple of days because my system is so used to clean food that if I use any processed food or any industrial food, I'm going to be sick to my stomach for a couple of days.
Anyway, just to bring things to a nice healthy close, you've already mentioned we can get hold of you on Twitter. You've got a website as well, I think, Wayne, haven't you?
I do. It's www.wayneroberts.ca, which is for Canada. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got your website, Twitter, and what's the Facebook handle?
Actually, the best one is if you go Dr. Wayne Roberts.
Right.
I don't know why I put that up there. I worked for the public health department, and I never used the term doctor to describe myself, but since I was surrounded by doctors, I thought, well, I better put one on. But so that's probably how it ended up on my Facebook. I've now trained myself to only do pictures on my Facebook site of farmers markets and easy recipes to do from farmers markets. Mm-hmm. And my Twitter, I sort of do whatever article attracts me to retweet it.
That's good, yeah. Okay, that's super.
Thank you again, Wayne, for being on the Low Carb Paleo Show. And as we say in Texas, à votre santé, y'all.
That's a fantastic Texas saying. I thought it was supposed to be "Don't mess with Texas."
Yeah, thanks again, Wayne. It's been wonderful having you on.
Thank you.